So, question 14. The law limits sabbaticals to 2 years. Should use of sabbaticals be eligible to stand for re-election for a second year, effective from the use of general election of 2013? Yes. Use yourself.
Hi, I'm Claire Rackley, and I'm Fiat. Okay. At present, our sabbatical officers can only stand for 1 year. Our sabbatical officers are those that are paid to represent us as students. What I'm proposing is that they should be eligible to stand for re-election for a second year. This is limited by the Education Act 1994, so they can't stand after a second year again. And why should they be allowed to stand? Well, this is not about giving sabbaticals more power, it's actually about the greater good of the Student Association. We've seen time and time again we'll get like a team or individual SABs who are absolutely fantastic and do a brilliant, brilliant job, but then the next year it will turn out probably not quite so good, and then we end up with forward text was taken the previous year, we then go backwards. What we need is the ability to be able to re-elect the good SABs, to keep the good SABs within the organisation, to ensure that we're still continuously going forward. If you do not believe, there are a few myths around 2-year SABs. One is that if you would stand for 2 years, you would automatically be re-elected. Well, that's not the case. You have to stand for re-election and you'll be held to account on what your performance was over the years. So if you've done a bad job, then students don't vote for you. If you've done a good job, then you're re-elected on to go on again and create continuity and bring experience. Because that's the thing that I found. I've been involved in the student movement for far too long. And on a national level, at a college level, and a youth level. And the thing that I've always found looking at sabbaticals is how much better they are in the second year. In the second year, in your first year, you essentially spend the first 3 or 4 months going, oh my God, what am I doing? Then eventually you kind of work it out a wee bit, and then you're out the door again. Whereas if you were able to actually go on and do a second year, you can actually hit the ground running, do some amazing things, like, continue on with campaigns that you started instead of them actually, so the person next to you doesn't have the same priority as you, it essentially goes out the door. These are all the reasons. 1 year SABs is a very old thing. It's something that a lot of student associations and unions down south used to have. Actually, most of them, in fact, almost all of them, most recently Sheffield and Portsmouth, have moved on to having 2 year SABs. It's generally believed that it's for the good of the association. It creates a stronger, campaigning, and more active union. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So it's about the very good, which the best people for the jobs, and second year SABs are better.
Hi, I'm Philippa, I'm from the No campaign. Firstly, I want to say this isn't about individuals, this is about the principle of 2 year SABs. And I really think that this proposition is totally at odds with the principles of the student movement. Our membership change every year, and therefore I really think our leadership should change too. We should play a part for a short time, give everything we've got, and then pass the baton on to the next person. And I really believe 2 year sabbaticals are not representative of the dynamic, constantly changing nature of our organisation. Without being representatory, we are nothing as an organisation. However, I realise that most people in this room and watching this video will want some practical discussion about the pros and cons, as Claire has outlined. People in favour of this say we need continuity in our leadership because campaigns take longer than a year often to win. Well, this might be the case, but I don't think 2 year SABs are the answer. Sabbaticals who are imposed for more than a year, I think, get stuck too much in organisational detail, and I think there's a tendency for them to become blinkered in their own opinion rather than students' views. We want dynamic officers that are going to go out and fight for education issues, not get stuck in admin. That's one of the reasons we employ staff. We need continuity in grassroots campaigners, and we should be actively building up and training and getting this legacy of people, good people coming through. We should not be focusing on continuity at the hierarchy at the top. You want people who've got lots of ideas, who are fresh in the job, and not jaded by the constant pressure. This is a very pressurised job, and I think 2 year SABs would become jaded in this. Do you really want to risk someone running again to prevent them having to go out into a competitive job market or to increase their likelihood of winning an NUS election? I don't want to think badly of people, but it does happen. Finally, I'm really concerned about the position, this proposition would create a hierarchy within the SAB team between the president and the vice presidents. In other unions down south, they do have this, but a lot of people run for a vice presidency and then become president. I don't want academic affairs to be seen as a pathway to becoming president. I think that's really unfair. So, thank you.
So 2 year SABs are not representative, they have blinkered views. You turn into jaded zombies, and it enables people to hang around waiting to get elected to NUS. I I have no opinion on anything. Okay, in the green there at the back.
I was just wondering, what's your views on the fact that once sabbaticals have served 1 year, they've had their face all over the Students' Union for an entire 12 months. They've been campaigning to students. Students know who they are. They're very popular with students already. And do they not gain the full benefit of the, I don't really know who I'm going to vote for, click, click, click voters, because they've just been seen by voters in the past, and people just vote for who they already know and what's familiar.
Okay, so if there's a SAB rerunning have an unfair advantage due to the fact they're known around campus?
No. For example, the president, or the guy that was president last year of Liverpool Guild have a very strange setup where everyone runs and then whoever gets the most votes gets president, and then so on and forth for the other SPAC positions. However, the guy that ran who was president last year ran again this year, and actually was really unpopular with students. He made some really unpopular decisions and then didn't get president again, someone else beat him. So actually it's about the fact of, yeah, your face might be all over campus, doesn't necessarily mean it's in a positive way. So if you do a bad job, you will be held to account.
Okay, that sounds reasonable. If you can do a bad job, you're held to account.
I agree to a certain extent. I do think that really bad sabbaticals don't get voted in again. However, I do think that having a massive picture of yourself outside Potter Row is probably a little bit of an advantage. But you could also say that about candidates who lose first time and then run again. So I don't think that it is a completely unfair advantage, but I do think that it is something that has to be taken into consideration. I think if this passed, I would be asking questions about whether we would have the same publicity of the sabbatical team visible during the election period, because I think that is a genuine discussion that should happen.
Okay, plenty of hands in there. I'll try and get somebody who hasn't spoken before. Orange teacher.
Thank you. Do the participants agree that by having 2 year sabbaticals that it creates a disconnect between the officer and the lay members of the student association, in that after have been on a salary for a year dealing with management meetings, that it takes them away from the student experience, which, as we've heard before, is always changing in terms of fees and all the rest of it, and it's not always the same impact and experience that they will have had when they're a lay member as opposed to an officer.
Okay, so does the second year have a disconnect from the students they are to serve?
I think it's important to recognise that I don't want to give blanket answers. I think there are individuals who make a real effort to stay in touch, as it were, with the electorate. So I wouldn't want to say that, make it a blanket thing, but I do think that being a sabbatical is a very different thing to being a student. I don't see normal students outside of work very much, and I do really worry that sabbaticals, as I said in my opening speech, that sabbaticals would become very organisational and not led enough by a grassroots movement. We are a movement, and I really do worry about that disconnect, yeah.
Two things. First of all, when it comes to sabbatical officers, if I can speak, any sabbatical officer that doesn't have connection with their students, doesn't go out and talk to their students, is not a good sabbatical officer. However, at the end of the day, it's also, that's what, as you call them, lay members, people who are non-paid on the student councils, as there will be, that's what their jobs are there to do, is to be able to bring up the grassroots movement, is to be able to sit there and go, well, this is an issue. But then again, you know, if you're a good SAB, you have that intuition, you know what's going on. I've seen some absolutely fantastic sabbatical officers who've done some of the best work that they've ever done in their second year, things they would not have had the confidence or the experience to do in their first year, and have pushed and pushed and pushed. I could name a few, but I won't.
I don't think you're allowed to come back in it, but I'm sure you can fit it in to answer your next question. I'm going to award perseverance, and at the risk of objectification, green hair.
Blue. Okay.
Blue. Just being blind, apologies.
Current constitution that was voted in last year actually already allows sabbaticals to run for 2 years, so I'd like to know what difference this actually makes constitutionally.
So the constitution currently allows 2 year SABs? Claire's already been quite vocal about this.
It's a technicality. It doesn't actually say one way or the other. The Constitution previously never said one way or the other. What technically used to stop them was, because I remember when I was really first involved when Thomas Graham was president. Yeah, some of you remember him, sadly. Okay. There was was loads of rumours going around as if he could actually be able to restand, and also with the SABs last year, which Philippa was involved in discussions herself, as to whether they could restand. It's always been a technicality. What it's actually always been is whether it would be going to university court in order to get the funding for it. What I'm proposing at the moment is that we have the discussion now on 2 year SABs. If that falls or is in core, the status quo remains. And then in the next round of referenda, we'll try and get something put specifically on the Constitution. There's never been anything that says it. It's essentially almost been a tradition within USAB.
No, I disagree. I was really upset about the wording of this question eventually. We submitted 2 different questions, and I really wanted clarity this year in order to limit the term to 1 year. But unfortunately, we have this wording, and we will have ambiguity for this year again. So I can't help that, but that is a problem.
Once again, it's perseverance. So purple.
Technical point.
Technical point. Okay. Hugh.
As far as I'm aware, the new constitution has that it's 1 year only.
No, there's no. I've read it.
Just clarification. Matt, are you able to answer this one for us?
Don't expect me to know that. He's only the president.
Does anyone know?
Yeah,
Mike, do you know?
I believe so. I did believe so myself. I then went to check because I was originally going to submit a question to change it, and could not find anything in there at all which limits to 1 year. It just doesn't say one way or the other.
But
Is this a response?
I know that I made a joke about not knowing, but the idea was that this was specifically said at the time of the consultation process that we would take a lead on what the outcome would be from referendum. Now, the referendum question that was submitted...
Is this a technical point, Matt?
It is. The referendum question that was submitted is in the capacity of and the gift of the people who submit the question, which in this case were Philippa and Claire. So it was their gift to decide what the question should be, and I think we should take a steer, and we could even be mandated if it's core, it'll be mandated from 2013. But we'll have to, we'll have to take that question as it comes.
So I think, yeah. So the answer is we don't really know.
Yeah.
That's great.
I'm sure some clarification on that would be quite useful. Back to questions and.
I don't understand why it's from 2013. Why is it not from this year? It seems like a really ridiculous thing to put in when we've got elections in March. I don't know.
Okay, so why is it from 2013? I'll hand the mic to one of you.
Yeah. This is not really kind of like joint questions at the moment. These are mainly directed at me, Graham. However,
I was unaware of that.
However, the reason why it's March 2013 is because it's a question on the issue, not on individuals. So elections are very close. If this had been in, say, the October referendum, then it wouldn't be an issue, but it's so close to elections, it can't be essentially if this year's SAB team can rerun or an individual within that SAB team can rerun. It's purely on the fact, do we want 2 year sabbaticals, nondescript, not talking about any one individual at all.
I think it should be said that we had a compromise on the question. I submitted a question which said we should continue to limit effective immediately, and Claire submitted something saying next year. We came to a compromise, and this is what we got. I want clarity as soon as possible, and this is the question we came up with.
Okay, we've already got time, but there seems to be quite a few hands in the air still. So I'll take, if you're very quick with your questions and answers, Matt.
I just wanted to say that obviously as a sabbatical officer I started thinking about whether I wanted to run or not at a time in which I felt I had to start thinking about whether I wanted to run or not if I wanted to win, and that was really around Christmas. I was just wondering to Claire if she would...
participants, please.
Sorry?
Both questions must be
both participants. I was just wondering if either of you two as individuals, negligent of your association with this question, would be comfortable with your sabbatical officers thinking about re-election rather than about student experience from around Christmas right through until the general election.
So would you be comfortable with your sabbatical officers thinking about re-election rather than serving students?
I think if they were only thinking about re-election, I would be very uncomfortable about that. Again, I don't want to give the impression that I think all people who think they might want to run again are really completely completely out for themselves. I think that's a wrong thing to say. But I do think it is a conflict. My election took up a huge amount of my time, and I would definitely want sabbatical officers to campaign in their annual leave rather than in their work time.
Do you know what sabbatical officers generally do for the last 3-4 months of their job? They sit around waiting to finish. Essentially, that is what happens. Really great example of, I saw one previous sabbatical officer more in the law library than I did in the actual office when he was about to finish. So it's kind of a bit nondescript. Like, the idea is that yes, there will be a campaigning period, yes, but then if you're a good sabbatical, you will still prioritise your students. At the end of the day, you should be able to be re-elected off what you've done, not necessarily off a massive campaign. It's also the fact that we would then lose those 3 months of sitting duck period where you're like, well, I'm about to get out the door anyway, you know, and handover period where you would actually just be continuing on with your job and getting on with it, getting ready for the next year and actually being more proactive than what you would have been anyway.
Okay, quick final question again for perseverance. Hand up there for age and the ages.
Do you think that lots of these arguments, like whether or not sabbaticals become out of touch or whether or not they have an unfair advantage, do you think that's actually has anything to do with this question, or do you think it's more of a bigger issue to do with accountability and transparency and being more open with the students in the first place?
So is it a question actually about accountability and transparency and not all the things that we've just been talking about?
Can you just clarify, do you mean at the beginning, in the first year, when people stand, or just can you repeat the question, sorry?
So it was said a few times that they might have a sabbatical running again, would have an unfair advantage, because they've got their face out there already or whatever, and that they'd be out of touch, and things like that. And it strikes me that that's part of a bigger issue about accountability and transparency. I just want to see if you agree or not.
Right, so it's the real question about SABs being accountable and transparent in general, rather than specifically about 2 years. Is that what we're...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Technically, if you've got a 1-year SAB, I mean, yeah, of course, you've got votes of no confidence, but essentially when they come into effect, when you were to have one, it would pretty much be by the time half their terms finish. Actually, 2-year SABs is a very good way of holding people to account, because it's the fact if you've done a bad job, you don't vote for them again, they don't get the job again, they don't get to represent you again. As to wider accountability, I think that's a different discussion to be had. I think that's maybe, a wider discussion to be had, but I don't think it's in relation to this question. Yes, there is accountability in there, but it's a different form of accountability rather than a general. If that made any sense, sorry.
So the ultimate accountability is 2-year SABs.
I agree with the second part of what you said, Claire, but I slightly disagree with the first part, because I think that sometimes you don't have to not come through with your promises to be a bad sabbatical. I've known several sabbatical officers who I would never vote for again, but in all intents and purposes they delivered. They weren't very good at communicating or working within our representative structures, and I think that there is a slight issue with accountability there. So yeah, I think it's part of it, but I agree with Claire, it's not the whole thing.
Okay, that's been an awesome debate. Time is actually up, unfortunately, so we get another massive round of applause.